willingness to work their roles.
The other part of this, the important factor to know and understanding is the balance of the relationship will tilt back and forth. I'll say that again. You have to understand, and the factor of knowing this is that your role, based on the balance of the scale, you know how a scale sometimes will tilt back and forth? Mm-hmm. That's the same thing we hear. The role is the weight, the responsibility, okay? So what's gonna happen? The accountability is actually in between us. So she's a weight, I'm a weight. She has a role, I have a role. But accountability is the thing that holds it together that's gonna tilt back and forth. Then at times, because the weight of the responsibility I carry, sometimes it's gonna be heavier. And then sometimes, depending on the situation, the weight of her responsibility, depending on the situation, now her weight will get heavier and mine will come up. You see how that goes? So what's going to happen? It's going to go back and forth. Give them the example what we were talking about last night about, you know, when Kyler was in football and we had to teeter back and forth, so they can understand that.
We were talking about how imbalanced relationships can be, and sometimes when you're imbalanced, if you're not aware that the relationship will never be completely balanced, then that's when the issues arise in the relationship, because you're thinking that someone is not doing enough work. Mm-hmm. So we were talking about when Kyler was in football, and Kyler's played sports from the time he could in school until he graduated, and then Chaz was very busy with things in school, and so we had to sit down because as their lives changed, as they got older, our marriage shifted as far as balance. And so we had to sit down, and there were days that he had to pick Kyler up on top of all the other things he had going on. And then there were days that I had to pick Kyler up on top of all the things that I had going on. So there was always that moment where we were imbalanced. Mm-hmm. It was never going to be a balanced scale, because on those days that I picked Kyler up, that meant I had to go to work, I had to cook, I had to get my child, and whatever else had to happen. Then the days that so that meant, like that Monday, I might have had one more thing to do. So that was the imbalance. And then Tuesday, he might have had one more thing to do. But what happens is couples argue and fight because if there's no communication about how the lives are changing and the children are growing and there's more commitments happening within the family, then the woman may do everything. But then she gets upset when frustrated with her husband because she feels he goes to work, comes home, gets on the couch and waits for her to cook dinner while she's doing homework, baths, everything. But you have to communicate so that you can try to have some type of balance in the relationship.
And so that's when what happens, the scale, the balance, the roles. Remember what I talked about? What is the weight? The weight is responsibility. So the responsibility of me being a father, being a husband, there are going to be times, depending on the situation, my weight, my responsibility is going to be heavier based on the situation. And then there's going to be times it's going to be heavy on her. Now, just because the fact is that the scale is tipping back and forth, it doesn't mean that the scale is off.
Right, that's good.
It doesn't mean that the marriage is off. It just means that there's going to be times that her situation is going to be a little heavier than mine. Mine is going to be a little bit heavier than hers, based on the situation.